Well, good morning, everyone. I think it is time to start this webinar. So I appreciate you all joining us today. This is the first webinar that the North Central Region Aging Network is hosting. And you may or may not have heard of the North Central Region Aging Network. We call ourselves NECRUN for the acronym. Of course, we have to have one of those. We are a group of individuals who are passionate about aging and bring expertise around aging in the North Central region. And there are 12 of us that are involved in this group representing the region. I'm the representative from Minnesota. And the primary goal of our group is to build capacity for an aging population. And so one of the things that we're starting with, we've been working for a while now, and we are working on developing a website which will have resources on it. We're also working on hosting these types of webinars to really share resources across the region. So we're delighted you're here today. At my last glance, I should say, I think we have 7 states out of the region, someone from at least 7 states on this webinar, so that's great. So let me introduce myself. I'm Marlene Stum. I'm a professor and extension faculty at the University of Minnesota. I am celebrating my 30th year here. So it's been a long, productive career here, I would say. And my email is there. I encourage you as we go along here, I will encourage you to feel free to contact me to ask more questions that if we don't get them answered on as we go along today. That said, I have been the lead researcher and author on Who Gets Grandma's Yellow Pie Plate. I'm I am the only actually remaining person on the team. So I continue to be working on the area of families and inheritance research. So we are going to focus on families and inheritance today. So here's where we're going to go. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about why families and inheritance matters, give you some sense of program history and introduction to the core concepts that guide Pie Plate. And I'm just going to call it Pie Plate to shorten it up as we talk today. I want to introduce you to our proven educational tools and resources. I want to talk about potential target audiences for the program resources, give you a glimpse at a research update, and leave time for questions and answers. So let's start with questions and answers. My hope is that as we go along, feel free to add questions to the chat box. Lisi Brown from South Dakota State is helping today, and as well as Aaron Yellen from Kansas State, both members of the regional network. And they're going to monitor that chat and make sure questions get answered. But primarily, we're going to hold questions and answers for the end. So feel free to unmute yourself and chime in, particularly at the end. I also want you to know that this is being recorded. We've had numerous people say they weren't available for today, but they're interested in seeing this webinar, and it will be recorded, and we will be publishing that URL. And a final kind of reminder is that if you are interested in the PowerPoints from today, simply send me an email and put in the subject line webinar PowerPoints, and I will send them to you. My email, again, was on the last screen, but it's mstum@umn.edu. And as we get started, I want to recognize that for some of you, there may not be a lot of new information today, particularly when I'm looking at some of the names on the list. I know you've been through training before. So for some of you, there may be too little, and some of you, there may be too much. So I recognize that we have a lot of, I expect different ranges of experience with families and inheritance on the line. So all of you as educators are used to that challenge, I know. So bear with me in terms of doing that. In light of that, I am curious, what is your experience with Who Gets Grandma's Yellow Pie Plate? And I've created some options that I thought might cover some of the bases here. So if you would, each take a second, look at this list, and add your letters to the chat box. Which of these represent you? And if none of them do, give me a quick description of your experience with pie plate. So I'll give you a second to do that. All right, thank you. Again, a range, but a lot of A's, so a lot of brand new to the content. So that's great. I know we have, as much as I've done training on this over the years, we have a lot of turnover in staff, and what's old to some is new to others. So I'm glad you're here, regardless of your experience. Let's dive into why it's important to address families and inheritance issues. And while some of this may be obvious, again, I think it helps to set the stage for why we're even talking about this issue today. And reality is, decisions about estate planning and estates are normative decisions that every family faces. And I think it's easy to think, well, I don't have enough money, or it doesn't really matter because I don't have enough things. But very few families escape some kind of decisions about that lifetime of accumulated assets and their possessions in later life. And so this is a program that is relevant for almost everyone, regardless of socioeconomic status, gender, culture, family structure. Again, there's just very few that escape this kind of decision. We also know that these are decisions that take place over time. I think it's easy to think, okay, we're only talking about after death here, but we're really talking about decisions that can be made possibly at divorce and remarriage, or gifting while a person's alive. Maybe they're downsizing, relocating, and obviously decisions do need to be made at someone's death. So the point being, it's rarely a one-time decision. Given that this issue is so prevalent and that so many people will face it, we also know that as an educator, we have lots of work to do. We need to understand what are the barriers between people knowing they're going to face this, and yet the action that they're taking is clearly, there's huge gaps between actions and what they need to be doing. So there are studies that show that the vast majority of adults will die without an up-to-date legal will. The last, probably most famous case in the state of Minnesota is that of Prince, who you would have thought would have had all kinds of, well, who did have all kinds of attorneys and advisors, but failed to have a legal will. And there's all kinds of implications of that, which will go on for years and years. An example of a famous person that has a lot more assets than most of us. We also know that even when somebody does have a legal will, they're not as likely to include wishes about their personal possessions. So regretfully, we have people who use masking tape, they have verbal promises, they make informal agreements, or they're in general just avoiding the topic. So the bottom line is, when we work with people around estate planning and decisions in later life, we really want to emphasize that decisions about both titled and non-titled are important. And titled property, just quick definitions, we're talking about anything that has that legal piece of paper that says this is mine or this is yours, that who owns the property. The house, your car, a stock, a bond, a CD, land, those kinds of things are obviously title property. And most people are much more aware that they need to make decisions about that. But all of those accumulated possessions are also part of our estate. The challenge becomes that the value of those possessions is in the eye of the beholder. And that value might be emotional, it might be financial, it might be both, and it might be neither. Some quick examples. I grew up in Western Kansas on a farm. Hello to everyone from Kansas. I grew up in Nest City, for those of you who know where that is. And I spent a lot of time with my grandma in my younger years, and I have a series of blocks from my grandma that have a lot of memory to me. All I have to do is look at those blocks and I instantly think of these great times with spending with my grandmother. But those blocks aren't worth anything financially. I might get 25 cents for the collection at an antique store, but that's not the purpose. They're just worth a lot emotionally to me. Somebody might have a collection that's worth a lot and others may not care about. So it might have financial value, but not necessarily emotional value to anybody. And you can think of the other examples. So a wide range of personal possessions, again, that we have accumulated that don't have a title, that you have possession of, and therefore have some reason to think that they're yours, which can also get to be a debate. We won't talk about that today, but that does get to be an issue of who actually has that possession. So decisions about both are important. And that's where Who Gets Grandma's Yellow Pie Plate comes in. A quick history lesson. First of all, think about where you were in 1994. I'm sure, well, I can't subtract quick enough here, but 24 years ago, it's possible some of you were not born yet, and others, who knows. So this project began back in 1994, and it began when extension educators across the state in Minnesota came to me as an extension specialist and said, you know, we're hearing from a variety of families that they need help with possessions, how to make decisions about those things, the stuff that they have. And basically, these educators were doing a lot with farm transfer and succession and spending a lot of time focused on the title property, the land and such. But what they were finding again is that families also had questions about possessions. So this infamous group of six of us, 5 educators and myself, formed a team. We also involved an advisory group of community members, professionals from the community, attorneys and probate folks and such that had experience with the issue. And we started exploring what was really known. This wasn't an issue that was ever on my radar screen as a researcher. I get asked that a lot. Well, what's your story? Why were you involved in this? And I honestly was at the right place at the right time and had an interest in family economics and aging. So that's the humble beginnings of Pie Plate. And since that time, again, all of the members have either retired or are doing other things. So I continue on. The the purpose of Pie Plate, again, is addressing those personal possessions. And when we first started, we were very interested in seeing, well, what other resources are there? Obviously, you don't create things if something exists. And what we learned pretty quickly was that there was very little on personal possessions. And a lot of the probate estate planning materials didn't mention it at all, or they mentioned might have a paragraph about, well, divide your possessions evenly, put that in your will. Or they might talk about fair being equal, but that was it. And for the most part, they ignored the social and emotional dynamics that's involved in decisions. So we really realized that there was a gap in terms of educational resources. So to fill that gap, as Extension, we really realized also that we wanted a solid research base. We didn't know enough about how people make decisions, what works, what doesn't, to really develop any solid conceptual materials. There wasn't research that was out there that was on personal possessions. So some of the original research, again, was published in '99 and 2000, and really has framed the core foundation of the Pie Plate materials. I'll talk later in the webinar about some of the current research we're doing on families and inheritance and building on that initial work. So that's the beginnings of Pie Plate. Doing some research, really working together to figure out what content people need and exploring different resources. We quickly learned that, and we learned this from probate and estate planning professionals and listening to a lot of family members' experiences, that in many cases, it's not the titled property, it's not the money that causes the conflicts in family, it's possessions. And I think that's contrary to what a lot of people think in terms of the reality of what people are challenged with when it comes to making some decisions. And that's not to say that decisions about money are easy, but there's certain unique aspects about possessions that seem to really influence the process. And I just want to highlight a few of these. Again, what are those complexities that seem to really challenge people? And I think it really helps to think of kind of that, I think of it as a metaphor of holding on and letting go, and the dynamics that's involved in that. So it's obviously objects have meaning for people, but as the example I gave you around the blocks, it's also highly connected to my family history, to the relationship I had with a grandmother, lots of memories. So it's much more than being materialistic. It's about the meaning of those objects. It's much more about the nature of the property, and again, the memories, and the memories connected to rituals or relationships that you had when those items were used, and the family dynamics that were involved in the use of those objects, than anything that's kind of legal or economic. And for those of you who may be concerned that this is a program that's a lot of legal or economic issues, I think as we kind of review some of the content, you'll quickly see that there are legal and economic consequences, but that's not, you absolutely do not need to be an attorney to teach this program. I'm not an attorney, and I'll point out where the legal content comes in, but it really does help to have some sense of family relationships, family dynamics, family functioning, and how all of that plays into possessions. I think of an example of a man who was in his 40s. He's involved in a research project right now, and he was talking about the golf clubs that are in his garage. He got those golf clubs from his grandfather and was delighted to inherit them because he's a golfer, but the grandfather's golf clubs are not really usable. So they've been sitting in the garage for about 20 years. And every year his wife and he are going through the garage, and she's going, "Can we throw these out yet?" And he's going, "Of course not." So it continues to be this, again, that process of holding on and letting go that sometimes is involved in our decisions about possessions. And I also want to share this quote again. My mom's funeral was a piece of cake compared to cleaning out the family home and closing the door for the last time. And I think anyone who's been through that process can relate to how physically exhausting it can be, emotionally, socially. It's a difficult process to lose, in effect, a home, to lose your parents, to lose that sense of history in your family. And whatever we can do to help kind of ease that process. Again, possessions are a piece of that. They're not all of it. But I think that statement really reflects the importance of possessions. So let's dive into a little bit more about what Pie Plate covers. The primary purpose is to optimize inheritance planning, to really encourage people to address all of their assets, but focuses on personal possessions in this case, and to protect family relationships. One of the challenges and the outcomes of not doing this process well is that parent-child relationships and sibling relationships can be destroyed. And those are some of the longest family relationships that are critical to health and well-being. We know that. So whatever we can do to protect older parents, adult-child relationships, and sibling relationships, and other family relationships is really, really critical to health and well-being. As I talked about the research that we did, what we have learned, and these have been confirmed over and over again over the years, that there seem to be at least 6 protective decision-making factors. And you see them listed before you. We're going to I'm going to give you a glimpse of each of these. We're going to work through them relatively quickly to give you, again, some sense of what content is involved in Who Gets Grandma's Yellow Pie Plate and the resources. There isn't anything magical about, these are not linear necessarily. And again, it's not as if this is a magic formula, but we do know that if you address these factors in a way that's specific to your family, that it really can make a difference. And I'll talk about some of the evidence we have of that. So let me take a breath and let's look at each of these quickly. The first is recognizing how sensitive this issue is and why it can be sensitive. And I think most people automatically think of and recognize that we don't deal with talking about death and dying very well in this country and in most families. And that's a core piece of why this is difficult to raise the conversation, to engage in the conversation. And we also, whether we're a giver or a receiver, worry a lot about how our motives will be interpreted. If I raise this issue, my parents will just think I'm greedy, or my siblings will know I'm greedy, or whatever it might be. Parents, on the other hand, worry that their kids will not want anything they have, and that really could be the case. So there's all these dynamics around fear of how our motives are going to be interpreted. And it's pretty common for the different generations to kind of place blame. Well, it's my parents who won't raise this conversation, or again, my kids are in denial. I've asked them what they wanted. They won't talk about it. So the content gets into that. We also talk about the potential for conflict. If it's a family that's had long rivalries between siblings or parent-child dynamics, those will continue in inheritance decisions. And we know that some family secrets and boundaries might be disclosed. You may learn some things about your family that you never knew before. So with those teasers, that's the kinds of things we talk about. And we also offer strategies for raising the conversations. What are some common ways that might work to engage others and break the silence? The next factor is determine what you want to accomplish. Not too surprising that we would probably recommend this, but it really comes from the fact that over and over families said they had never talked about what they hadn't talked about what they were trying to accomplish. They didn't know if they were on the same page. They really weren't sure what they were trying to do, except in their language, get rid of the stuff, right? So a lot of times goals are unspoken and identified. We know that the more that you can understand your priorities, understand what's most important, and understand what each of these mean, that is a great starting point, and where you agree or disagree. And these are 5 goals that, again, evolved in our research, and again, are not probably too surprising to anyone. Maintaining privacy is a challenge for many people, and by that we're talking about privacy both within the family, who gets to know, and whether any of these processes or decisions should be public. So again, I'm going to leave you with some teasers, but we have we talk about goals and the need to prioritize and helping people identify their priorities. The next decision factor is decide what's fair in the context of your family. And this whole issue around fairness is quite challenging and actually quite exciting at the same time. If you can be passionate about something, this is the one that I've continued to spend time on in my research, and I'll talk to you again about that at the end a little bit. But by fairness, we're really recognizing that most people will say they have a goal to be fair. I just want to be fair. And I think automatically people think, well, fair means being equal. Well, it doesn't in all cases. And so there's multiple layers here. So first of all, family members, we know, have different rules or perceptions of what's fair. If you ask me what's fair versus my older sister, I guarantee you're going to get different answers around who should get what, or who did get what in our case. And it's when there is no shared meaning that those different rules become a source of conflict in a family. We also know that fairness is more than just about the end result or the outcome, the who gets what. That's a piece of it. But a big piece also is the process, is how fair is the process? And those two are connected. If you agree to a process and feel like it's fair, even though you don't like the outcomes, you're more likely to accept them. And so our content, our materials, our worksheets focus a lot on helping people understand what they consider to be fair from their vantage point, what would be fair in their family system for both outcomes, what are those decision rules you might use, and the process, and what you need to think of about process. So we do spend a fair amount of time, I keep saying that, a fair amount of time, we spend a lot of time on fairness in the workbook, and it's something that doesn't exist in a lot of other materials. So I think it's a key component that really helps people move forward. Next, we talk about understanding belongings have different meanings to different individuals. And while that again may be obvious, what's not so obvious, I guess, is that it's okay to ask others. Again, I think many older parents need that nudge to say, ask your kids what they want. Ask other people what they want and why. And so again, we have some worksheets, we have some common questions to help raise those conversations, to encourage people to share the stories about items that are meaningful. And again, recognizing that there can be different value that emotional, financial, or no value from some people's vantage points. We also, this is my one joke of the day. It's hard to find jokes about possessions, I think, but here's one that usually gets a chuckle, which isn't fun when you're on a webinar because you can't hear your chuckles. But we also really discuss avoiding assumptions, assuming that everyone wants your things because they're important to you. And on the flip side, also assuming people won't want anything because of some of the things they may have said. So avoiding those assumptions, opening the communication about what are the pie plates in your family, what will people want, finding that out. The next factor is considering distribution options and consequences. And again, we would say there's no one perfect method. We spend time talking about a range of options that we know are used and the possible consequences, getting people to think about the consequence of having a public auction and requiring family members to bid against everyone else when the family members may have very different income and assets. Thinking about the consequences of things that they may not have done before. We talk about everything from gifting to public-private options to doing nothing. And most of all, probably the most important thing we do is talk about, and here's the one simple legal thing in this content, I would say, is helping people understand that really what they should be doing is creating a separate list that's part of their will where they can identify who should get what. It's very simple to do. It's legal in almost all states, and you can verify that with a legal expert. If you're teaching this content, I encourage you to obviously do that. We'll talk a little more about where that comes in and if you intend to teach this. Again, it's very easy, and we're not talking about making a list of absolutely everything in that home, but we're talking about the most important possessions and really identifying particularly the pie plates, not that they all have to be a financial worth again, but it could be those items that you know might be a conflict, so that it's a legally recognized way to have a list versus those informal agreements. So distribution options and consequences is a factor that a lot of people aren't really familiar with really what happens or what should happen with their possessions when they die. They make assumptions that, and I know this happens a lot, is that family members come to the house after a funeral, and as someone say, whoever gets there first gets it. That's, you know, it becomes part of an estate after somebody's death, and it really is now the executor's right to carry out the wishes of the owner. So I think it helps people recognize that there's some better strategies and methods. And last but not least, we talk about agreeing to manage conflicts if they arise. And we know that, again, from the research, that there are some common sources of conflict that carry over from not communicating to having different perceptions about who should do what, to those unresolved conflicts, to, again, different attitudes or values about maybe inheritance in general. And the goal in this section is really to get people to anticipate what the conflicts might be in their family and to offer some strategies for managing those conflicts and referring people on when they're not manageable by kind of internal resolving. And we also really want to recognize that in all of the research and the teaching of this, we have consistently learned that some families do this process really well, that it really can serve as a time to celebrate a person's life, to provide that continuity. It doesn't have to end in a nightmare or in conflicts. And again, I think that a lot of people thrive on the stories that end up in court or end up being horrific, but the vast majority of families aren't going to end up in court spending lots of money. So there are many positive examples of how families negotiate and compromise. So those 6 things are, again, the core content of the resources. With that, so that should give you some flavor of the content that you would be teaching and some of the sense of what's there. Let's move on to talking about what resources are available. These have changed slightly over time, and again, I'll try to give you some perspective. If you haven't been exposed to this, you really probably don't. It won't matter to you what they used to be. It mostly matters what they are now. So we have a series of resources that are available. And you can think about, as we go through these, how you might help others get acquainted with these, or how you might incorporate them in existing programs, how you might get them out to certain target audiences. Again, I encourage you to be creative about thinking about how you might get the word out and use these resources with your target audiences. So the key resource that we have is a workbook. It's been the key resource. It remains the key resource. It really has the worksheets in it for each of those content areas. It has reading material. The content has not necessarily changed at all dramatically over time. So if you have an old workbook, which doesn't look like this cover, I still would encourage you to move on to the new workbooks. It's time to update the logo and the formats and all of those kinds of things. Can you use the older workbooks? I get that question a lot. They're not worthless, but again, we would encourage you to update your teaching materials with the new workbook. And you can see what the cost is. Actually hasn't changed. Every time I do this, I think it hasn't changed in 24 years. I'm not sure that's good or bad, but it's good for the consumer. And there's a quantity discount, and we'll talk about how you might use that as an educator. You can order and really get a good deal at $7.50 a piece. So this is the core resource that family members really need to dig in and work on those concepts. We sell it at the U of M bookstore. It's available actually at Barnes & Noble, and I believe you can get it on Amazon. I chuckle because not too long ago, I honestly don't know if it was Barnes & Noble or Amazon, but I found a copy that was used for $100. I didn't order it. So beware, I'm not sure what all is out there. So unfilled, unused are available. Okay, so that's the workbook. That's the core piece. We also have found that many people want to come to a workshop. They want to hear kind of that in person, get introduced to those core concepts and learn kind of the basics. And they also don't want one that's longer than an hour to an hour and a half. So in that short time frame, you can realize how in a way, how little you can cover, but it is very possible to introduce the issue, to introduce the 6 key concepts, and lead them to resources. And the audiences, we're going to talk more about these, but basically the workshops are very valuable for property owners, for those often older adults, for spouses, partners, for adult children, siblings. So across the generations, those individuals who may be involved in navigating those inheritance decisions. We know, again, if you're interested in more details on this, let me know. We have, again, in earlier years, we gathered data from over 24 states that implemented this program. And so we know that we have some evidence that even a 1-hour workshop can change knowledge. And this is really what that 1-hour workshop will do. I really kind of just said that. But really help people understand the 6 key issues, understand next steps, and be aware of what those critical conversations are. We also have evidence that we can change intentions and planning behaviors, that people are more likely to initiate those conversations, to really find out what each other's thinking about goals and fairness, come to some shared meaning on those, and take action so that they're actually preparing a will, creating that separate list for property. So it can make a difference in terms of knowledge, intentions, and behavior. Typically, some of the resources we have, again, allow individuals to teach that 1-hour workshop. So we have facilitator tools that you would expect. We have an up-to-date PowerPoint presentation, the facilitator notes that go with that. And we typically, when I go out and teach this, I typically hand out a one page back-to-back flyer that has the 6 key factors on it and information on where to purchase the workbook and such. So that's kind of your basic, the basic tools you need to teach the 1-hour workshop. A common question is, who can teach the workshop? And the answer is anybody, basically. This is not a program that's only, or that it's exclusive to Extension. It's a program that anyone can purchase and self-teach themselves to teach. I didn't word that very well, but I think you know what I meant. There is no certification. There's no absolute required training. We're delighted to do training for Extension folks, and often do, so that you are perhaps more prepared. But anyone can purchase a Workshop Facilitators Toolkit. This is what the toolkit looks like as of 2015. And in that, it really is everything you need it to kind of self-teach yourself. It has an updated research background. It has all the information about target audiences and how to design workshops. It offers the evaluation tools, teaching tips. So everything, it includes the workbook. It includes a DVD that's a 13-minute DVD that you can use or lend to folks. So that package is $75 plus shipping and handling. We believe it's a good deal because you get the workbook and the DVD, which if you bought them separate would be $45. So it may sound expensive at first glance, but I think compared to many things, it's a good investment. So that's the Facilitators Workshop. So who can teach? I'm going to come back to that for 1 second. So there are individuals, for example, I know we have a group of professionals called Senior Move Managers that are in the business of helping seniors downsize, and can also help executors when someone dies. And they are obviously interested in getting clients. And so this is a workshop that these are materials that they often use with their clients, but they also find doing the workshop is a good way to publicize their business in effect, and yet share some good information. So that's just an example of another group or professional who may be using these materials. So again, it's not exclusive to Extension. On the other hand, I know, again, we don't track everyone who purchases this and follow them up on exactly who they're teaching. So I can't answer that, but I know in general that at least half of the states have offered this statewide, and I have evidence of that, and I know that practically we've sold workbooks in every state and internationally. So it is out there. I mentioned that there's evaluation tools in the toolkit. Again, you can choose how you want to do these and if you want to do them. We also have talk about different ways to add depth and length to that 1 hour workshop. And I mentioned the DVD. The DVD was and is part of our, it's currently part of our programming resources as part of that Facilitators Toolkit. So some people may choose to use that along with, if you wanted to do a longer workshop. The DVD was designed to be a quick introduction, again, to those 6 concepts. It's 13 minutes, so it's very short. We have found that, to our surprise, families want that DVD so that everyone can kind of quickly get up to speed and hear the same messages. So it's used, it's purchased more by family members than we ever expected. And I will also say that it was done in 1999, and we have talked about redoing it. The content, I would argue, and having people evaluate it, is timeless. It's not that the content is out of date, but I will say that some of the hairstyles and clothes look a little out of date. And in talking with a lot of different extension folks about this, I think the experience suggests that when you're using this with an older, I'm saying 50 plus audience, I don't think they will be as concerned about the look and feel of that video as perhaps somebody who's younger. So I think for the target audience, and you can use your judgment, it's still great content. So with that caveat, I will say a lot of people have found value in that DVD. The workbook I've talked about, again, there are different ways. People say, well, do you use the workbook when you teach? And you could. Ideally, you would have copies. You would build in the cost of those workbooks if you're charging for the session. Again, that's when you can obtain quantities at a discount, but you can clearly, in 1 hour, you can't really work people through the workbook. So that's another way to think about how you can expand the depth and breadth, do a series of workshops. There's all kinds of creative ways that we talk about in the Facilitator's Guide to do longer or deeper workshops. We also have a website. I hope you visit or have visited. It's really the core where to find everything. We have free articles on there that you can adapt for newsletters, for other kinds of things like the top 10 reasons to talk about this or those kinds of things. We have Are You Prepared quizzes for different, for owners, receivers, executors, a range of resources, including that's where you will find all the links to buy materials and descriptions and samples. The newest product that really is new in the last week. We don't even have it listed on our website yet, but this is a podcast that's almost an hour long. It was initiated by a professional in Virginia, state of Virginia, who works with executors. He actually works with a realtor firm, and they work with executors to sell homes. And part of the process is they deal with a lot of the getting rid of the things. And so he found me and our resources, and this podcast resulted from that. So I encourage you to take a look at it or listen to it. It really is tailored to executors who are trying to work it out after the fact versus some of them are planning in advance. So that's the newest product we have. We also, I'm in the process of creating what I think of as an online presentation. It's really, it's putting the workshop in a video format that will allow people to access that workshop content wherever they are. So it's increasing the access. It will be a great tool when people say, well, I wish my other family members could hear this. So you send them the link. It will be free. It will encourage people to buy the workbook, but not require the workbook. So think of it as the workshop online. That will be an additional tool that's out there. I don't think any of us can, with our staff and extension today, you can't replace there's still a need for in-person workshops, but we clearly can't offer a sufficient number of workshops. So this will help fill that gap. In all of this, we really ask that you protect the quality and integrity of the program. We have a trademark title. We ask that you use it. We ask that you not copy or distribute pages of the workbook. And again, the reasons are to really protect, again, that quality and integrity. We feel like we priced the workbook very reasonably over the years and encourage people to purchase that. If you have any questions or needs about wanting to add your logo or anything to the flyer, just ask. We will explore what's possible. I also want to quickly tell you kind of the source of the title, because I get this question a lot. Where did the title come from? Well, the title came from a group of educators in Southwest Minnesota who were sitting around a table with an intern, whose name is Andrea, a young intern at the time. And we were at that point where we didn't really have a title. And she simply said, in my family, it's Grandma's Yellow Pie Plate. And that was her story. And she's in the video, and it caught on, it works. Everybody kind of gets the meaning of that very quickly. So that's where the title came from. Okay, let's switch to, now that you have some sense of the content, you've got some sense of what the range of resources are, who are the target audiences? We've hinted at them as we've gone along. I think it helps to think about, we're really trying to reach people at two different phases. We developed these resources initially for people who are planning in advance, wanting to engage in those conversations, create that separate list, understand and come to some decisions about goals and fairness. And for the most part, that's the older property owners and spouses, partners, and adult children and siblings. We also have learned that there's probably more of an audience, what I call after death, those estate executors, the personal representatives, who are often the adult children, siblings, who are, as they will say, working it out. They are now, we get calls all the time, well, my family's meeting on Saturday and I'm the executor and I don't have a clue where to start in terms of figuring out what fair would mean, for example. So we have learned that there's again, that audience, kind of the executors, those who are dealing with kind of when somebody didn't plan what to do. With that, I would like to wake you up if you're taking a nap out there, and quickly ask you what opportunities you think exist. So let me qualify this with this statement. We know that it's much easier, I say we, I'm sure all of you would agree with this, I think, that instead of trying to bring an audience together, it's much easier to reach older adults and adult children where they naturally gather, go to them, right? So what are some ideas that you have or that you've used, for those of you who've been teaching this? What really works? What are some of the ways to reach the older adults and adult children? Share some, quickly, just share some ideas and do a quick survey of what others are listing in the chat box.
Marlene, are you following the chat too?
I am following the chat.
Wonderful.
Give you a few more minutes to kind of add your ideas. So you can get a sense of a wide range of how people are approaching this, from, as somebody said, I just put it out there and always get an audience. That can work. They're partnering with other places. So let me share kind of a working list that we have accumulated over the years, and I will add your ideas to this as we go on. Clearly, going to work sites. A lot of work sites are looking for those health and well-being sessions and broadly interpreting health and well-being. And so going to where people are at work is clearly that captive audience. We have found a lot of interest in faith communities when they have their adult learning organizations or subgroups that are very interested in later life transitions. Service clubs, organizations, I see many of you listed those. Support interest groups. I would say think about older adults, but with the caution of not going too late, because someone in a nursing home may have already disposed of most of their possessions, for example, even assisted living. I think you're safe, again, targeting those who are still independent. They may have decisions yet to be made, but a caution in there about kind of who you're targeting with older adults. And I also want to mention that we have a range of educators across the country I know who have really successfully integrated this content into farm transfer and succession workshops. They're working with perhaps ag economics, or in the state of Minnesota, we have educators working with forestry folks who are doing workshops around preserving and transferring forest land. So I think there are many different ways to, again, think about who are the audiences that are planning in advance, that may be working it out after the fact, and where they naturally are. So there's lots of possibilities for that. I also want you to think about professional audiences. And by this, I'm really saying, think about the range of professionals who encounter this issue but don't have the expertise to deal with it. And in many cases, they don't. Let me just take attorneys and financial planners, perhaps. They acknowledge they don't have the expertise to deal with some of the family dynamics and really dive into some of the issues, but they're hungry for resources that can help them because their clients are struggling with these issues. So let me share a quick example. Financial planner. I had a small financial planning firm that I did some work with in the fall, they said, we want to purchase 300 workbooks for our clients as holiday gifts. And then we would like you to come do a workshop, in-person workshop for those clients that choose to come. And so I think we had about 50, and we also trained their staff. So that's a great example of trying to work with financial planners who want the expertise. They also want to see how they can incorporate these resources into their practice. And in some cases, they want to become trained to teach the material. And in other cases, they really don't. They want you to come teach the material for their clients. So that, I think that's a great example of getting the information out to a range of professionals. And I mentioned a wide range of professionals who are, again, they're dealing with that paring down, downsizing, and they have found these resources to be really quite valuable. So they're one of the best marketing tools we have. I also want you to think about media. We always are continually, I think, shocked at how many people are interested in this topic. This is a quick sense of articles that have existed that I've done interviews for, that we've been cited for. I think we're up to 6 times in the Wall Street Journal now. So this has been one of the key ways to get information out, is through the media, whether it's public radio, whether it's, these are all news or online or print kind of resources. So be creative in thinking about how you may reach audiences, and know that media is hungry for information and good resources. All of that said, I would say that keep in mind how increasingly relevant this topic is. Think about the aging population, the growth in that population, and the number of families that are going to experience this issue. So while these resources have been around for 24 years, they're more relevant than, I mean, they're as relevant as they were, and there's more people that are going to be in need. They continue to fill that void in research-informed resources. I would say, just echoing what the gentleman from Virginia said, when he found our resources, he said, you know, I haven't found anything else out there that's like this. And so we know we have a kind of a unique niche that's research informed and that fills that goal. Regretfully, there's a lot of research that still has not been done. There's still lots of unanswered questions. And I'm watching my time, so I may kind of breeze through some of this a little bit because I want to make sure we leave time for questions. But just to give you a perspective, and if you are interested in doing research in this area, I encourage you to dive in because there are so many things that we don't know yet. And it's not easy to get data, but I think there's lots of room for creativity. So amazingly, in how many years, as you can see in front of you, only 4 studies have dealt with inheritance from a family member's perspective. And our work is some of that. So there's really very little that's been done. That's in the US. If you look internationally, there's perhaps 8 more studies. And a majority of those were done in Australia. And the group in Australia really built on our research around fairness and reinforced some of the struggles around competing goals. They built on understanding some of the goals that people were after. And I think for time's sake, if you are interested in knowing more about the research, again, there's a summary of what's to date in the Facilitators Toolkit, or if you just want some selected articles, please just email me and I'd be glad to send you some examples of articles or current articles to encourage your reading about the research and feeling like you know what's out there. In addition to that, there has been some work in Canada that has really focused on inheritance communication, and again, focused on understanding why it is adult children and aging parents have such difficulties talking about this. Again, they've reinforced the issues around mortality, around those differences in valuing possessions, and again, some of the motives around how we express what our motives are and the effects that that can have on people. So that's a more recent study. Sorry, I flipped back. And of course, I have to talk about our study that we have been doing since 2011. We have a family inheritance project that's going that is really diving into fairness, because that has been such a hot button and there's so little known about it, again, from an inheritance standpoint. Our study is really focused on examining the meaning and experience of fairness. We've, in this study, are focused on both titled and non-titled. We have talked with older parents and at least 2 siblings in a family system. And we're really, again, using an interpersonal social justice framework, which is the theory behind fairness and understanding outcomes and processes. So it's been, it's provided a lot of information about planning processes, and again, allowed us to really think more about fairness for both titled and non-titled. We are particularly focused on understanding procedural justice, procedural fairness. And again, I can't do these justice, but I just want you to know there's manuscripts in process that are in the works. We've done some presentations on these, but we're really learning a lot more about what makes a process fair and what are the criteria that family members need to think about and talk about. So you'll hear me talk about a toolkit that's coming, and it really is utilizing what we're learning to really develop more in-depth worksheets for families, assessment tools, communication tools around fairness, and particularly fair processes. So what matters, what makes a process fair? The last slide talked about participation. We know that communication and how individuals are actually treated. Again, we have many examples and specifics within each of these that we've been learning. In addition, I get a lot of questions about step families, and is this content of Pie Plate relevant for step families? And we've been very intentional about including examples throughout of different family structures, and I would say absolutely yes, step families are covered. That said, we also know we have many examples in there, and the concepts apply regardless of family structure. But but we know there's more things to be learned, and so here I've given you a quick summary of some of the key findings that we have from the current research, where we have really tried to tease out how do perceptions of what fair means differ in step families or for step families. And there's clearly certain things that step families need to think about in different ways than others. So that quality of parent-child relationships seems to matter, the length of parent-child relationships, obviously lots of discussion around who's in and who's out, really addressing some of those tensions, which can be tensions between blood genetic stepchildren, and recognizing the importance of biological family ties to many people and how they interpret that and what that means. So again, that's a manuscript in process. I expect to have more details about that. And this is what we hope to get out by 2019. And a working title at the moment is A Fair Divide, meaning families and inheritance resources, and it will really be focused on fairness. It'll be for both titled and non-titled, and we'll really provide a variety of tools to help family members really come to some shared meaning. So you can watch for that, adding more depth to PyPlate. Okay, so my question to you is, are you prepared? I encourage you to explore the website, to gather and try up-to-date teaching resources, to immerse yourself in the workbook, do your state-specific homework on estate planning laws, and ground yourself in the research content. And so I don't forget to say it, I hope as you teach this, I continually hear from educators how much fun this content is. It's serious, and you may have lots of tears at a workshop, but it's still fun. It really does serve a need, and I hear educators say it's one of the most rewarding programs they've ever taught. So with that, I am going to skip to questions and answers. And because I've been talking, I have not been able to, I'm not that good at multitasking to read the questions in the chat box. So
I gotcha.
Lisa's going to cover my back on that, and then we're going to open it for questions.
So I have two questions that popped up during the discussion. The first is, when delivering this program, would you recommend having an attorney or other third party present to help with questions?
I would not. There's nothing wrong with it, but I think it takes a very different tone. I think for the purpose of a 1 hour workshop or 1.5 hour workshop, on those 6 core concepts, you do not need a legal expert. If you want to do something that's different or adds more depth, that covers more legal content, that's a different kind of, I mean, I know people have done that. They've done different panels and brought in somebody so they really could talk about wills, for example, or preparing a will if you wanted to do this in addition. But I'm confident that you don't need legal expertise to teach this.
Perfect. Thank you, Marlene. And the other one, it says, in the teaching kit I purchased back in the beginning, which included a VHS tape and came out before the workbook existed, there were worksheets and handouts which were to copy and distribute as needed. Based on what you just said about not copying the workbook pages, does that mean we're not to use those handouts and worksheets?
It does. Those were from a few years back, and I think maybe even before we did the workbook. So we do ask that you not, again, because the workbook is such a good price, we encourage you to help us market that workbook and not give out for free the contents that are in the workbook.
So those are the questions that came in. If there's other questions, feel free to type them in the chat box and I can read them to Marlene, but Marlene is now able to watch the chat box. There you go. So it sounds like a tip. You could use the quizzes from the website.
You can use the quizzes from the website, the free articles there. And I think all those things that are available on the website should make sense of what you can use or not use. And again, anytime you have questions on that, just feel free to send me an email or give me a phone call if you're having any question about, oh, am I doing this right? Or should I not be doing this or that? So don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions about that. We're always kind of helping states figure out how to deliver this in a way that makes sense and meets some of their needs. And if you're interested in more training or more in-depth training, whether it's via webinar or whatever, let me know. I would love to help folks feel like they're confident in teaching the program. I can see, and now that I have time to look at the chat box, that there's many good examples of kind of reaching how to reach target audiences, some things that have worked. Other questions? I think I've tried to cover some of the common ones I get, like who can teach? Should you use old resources? Which is, again, encouraging you to update your resources, use the new things as opposed to older PowerPoints, older workbooks. Relevant for step families, I talked about that. I'm trying to think of some other common questions that I get. Any other questions or suggestions from those who have experience that are online? Okay. Could we use a worksheet from the book if it's part of the fee each participant is getting? I'm not sure quite how to answer that. So if they're getting the workbook, they will have the worksheet. Again, I guess in general, we discourage people from copying and giving any part of the workbook out because it's copyrighted. If I'm not interpreting that right, or you have more questions, feel free to email and I'll talk to you. And some thank yous. Thank you for being on today. I will come back to Q&A because we have a little time. But before that, I think all of you have added your email and state to the chat. So thank you for doing that. It's helpful for us to know who's interested and who's on. And again, if you're interested in getting PowerPoint slides from today, just send me an email. And I've said if you have questions. And I want to call your attention before we sign off to the next webinar that the North Central Region Aging Network is hosting, and that will be done by Erin Yellen from Kansas State, who's online here, and it's on Alzheimer's 101. So if you have questions on that or need information, Erin, what would you suggest they do?
You can contact me. My email address is Erin Yelland, ERINYELLAND @ksu.edu. And we are looking forward to providing that. And that, similar to Marlene's, will review a curriculum that we've developed in Kansas State and that we're currently using to educate folks on Alzheimer's disease.
Okay, well, I think people are probably tired of listening at this point. But thank you for your ideas and thoughts, and it'll be fun to go back and look at the chat box. And I wish you all a great success in teaching Who Gets Grandma's Yellow Pie Plate. Again, it's there's great needs out there. People will be you will hear more stories and be able to write your own book after teaching this. Everyone has a story. I truly believe that. It seems like the last couple presentations I've had, the person that introduced me unexpectedly shared their own family story about the pie plate and what had happened. So I know that professionals of all type, not just regular folks, have stories. So it's a critical issue, and it's part of a normative later life decision that we will all deal with. So thank you very much. Yes, the webinar is going to be recorded. We will get that information out to folks. If you have a state representative that's on the North Central Region network, they would be your best source of information. And if you have questions about that, Erin, Lisa, or I could answer those right now. So thank you very much. If you're ready to leave, that's fine. Have a good rest of the Friday. And if not, I'll stay on here for a little bit and take questions. Thanks, everyone. Feel free to unmute and talk too.
There's a question in the chat box.
Last version of the workbook is 2015, I believe. That's terrible that I don't have one sitting here. I believe that is it.
Marlene, can you put the website in the chat box so that people can click on it? Could you flip back one slide too so they can see your email? Thank you.
Here's my email. Honestly, I don't have the whole website memorized, but
Let's see if I can find it.
you can basically get to it at yellowpieplate.umn.edu. If you just Google that, I didn't mean to put a slash on the end, sorry, that you will find it.
I don't know if this is it, but I think it is. Maybe. That's one of them. It's got to get you close.
I do know if you Google that. It's on the main extension website, so sorry if that's confusing. That's why I don't have the whole thing memorized.
No,
but I do know literally you can just Google Yellow Pieplate and umn.edu and you'll find it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marlene.
So we've got website, email. Any other burning questions?
Well, hearing none, I'll throw something out to the group. Part of the North Central Aging Region Network, we want to help connect professionals with information that they're seeking about aging, older adults, kind of a wide variety of topics. So if you think of something that you would like to see some professional development on, webinars, that type of information, feel free to contact us and we'll see if we can help out, because you know our whole wheelhouse is end of life. So not just end of life, aging.
Well, I think we've covered it. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Lisi and Aaron. If you have thoughts, feel free to email me afterwards. And we're good to go.